Hey guys. So we've got a really short chapter this week, and it's about helping others. What? It's like it was meant to be, guys. Okay, so um, if you haven't read it yet, welcome. Let's read together. Sorry, I've had a long week, so I'm going to do this on my couch where I'm nice and comfy. Okay. Helping others. It's got 4 sections. The evolutionary and motivational factors for why people help. Then next one is situational. When do people help? The third one is personal influences. Who's most likely to help? And the fourth one is interpersonal. Whom do we help? Who do we choose to help? Okay, so let's get cracking at this. The first page talks about it was their bravery that compelled them to risk their lives, but it was their compassion that ultimately saved them. 6 firefighters from New York City's Ladder Company 6 were among the many rescue workers who courageously climbed up the stairs of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. The jets that had flown into each of the twin towers of the skyscraper were hemorrhaging fuel, causing an inferno of unprecedented proportion. The massive stream of people trying to flee raced down the narrow stairs, passing the firefighters who were going up. Awed by their courage and resolve, people yelled encouragement and blessings to the firefighters as they passed them. Under the burden of more than 100 pounds of equipment, the men of the Ladder Company 6 had reached the 27th floor of the North Tower when they heard the horrifying sound of the South Tower collapsing. Their captain had ordered them back, realizing that if the other tower could collapse, so could theirs. On their way down, around the 14th or 15th floor, they encountered a frail woman named Josephine Harris. She had walked down almost 60 flights already, and she was exhausted. The firefighters helped her walk, but she was slowing them down dangerously. Their captain, John Jonas, was growing more anxious. I could hear the clock ticking in the back of my head. I'm thinking, come on, we gotta keep moving. But none of the 6 men considered leaving her behind, so they slowly walked down together. Josephine didn't think she could go on, but one of the firefighters asked her about her family and told her that her children and grandchildren wanted to see her again. Sorry. I was in the 9th grade when this happened, to give you an idea of how old I am. So, yeah. She continued, but finally collapsed as they got near the 4th floor. On the 4th floor, they tried to find a chair to carry her in. And then the 110-story skyscraper collapsed all around them. Other rescue workers who had passed this slow-moving group on the stairs were killed on the floors below them. Virtually everyone who was still above them was killed. And yet, somehow, this group survived, trapped in an inexplicable pocket of safety amid the unimaginable wreckage. Along with 2 other firefighters, a fire department chief, a Port Authority police officer. After a harrowing search of a way out, they eventually found a small ray of light, a literal ray of hope, and followed it to safety. The firefighters later called Josephine Harris their guardian angel and thanked her for saving their lives. They realized that if they had not encountered her, they would have gone down the stairs faster. And had she not kept walking despite exhaustion, they would have been a few floors above. Either way, they would have been killed. But Josephine Harris knew that she owed her life to these brave men who risked not seeing their own children again so that she could see hers. There were many other heroes that day, including ordinary citizens whose acts of self-sacrifice to help others were not part of their job descriptions. Some of the help was dramatically heroic, like that of the passengers aboard the hijacked United Airlines Flight 93. They decided to fight the terrorists on their flight and sacrifice their own lives in order to try to prevent the terrorists from killing many more people on the ground. And much of the help was behind the scenes, as in the cases of people who volunteered endless hours to do the grueling work of cleaning up the disaster area, helping the injured and the grieving, donating money, donating clothes and other resources. When people read stories such as these, it's natural for them to wonder what they would have done. Would they have risked their lives to help others? What makes some people at some times act to help others? The wonderful acts of helping during the chaos of 9/11 are inspiring, to be sure. But there were also many stories that day of people who turned their backs on others, even on people who had just helped them. Every day there are numerous unheralded acts of helping others and of failing to help others. A volunteer works tirelessly in a health clinic, a college student tutors a child, a congregation raises money for a charity, and an older sister lets her little brother win at checkers. And yet, every day, some people ignore the screams outside their windows. They drive past motorists stranded on the side of the road, or try to avoid making eye contact with a homeless person begging on the street. Every few months we see a story like Anival Angulu, a homeless man who saved a 3-year-old girl and a 10-month-old baby from a burning apartment unit in Las Vegas, December 2017. When Angulu heard the screams of the children, he jumped over a lock gate and somehow pulled down a steel security door that was deadbolted to get the children out of the burning building. And we learn about people like Jairo Torres and Antonio Love, who jumped onto subway tracks in New York City in September 2019 to rescue a 5-year-old girl whose suicidal father had jumped in front of a train while holding her. And all too often, we also learn stories like what happened outside a strip mall in Oceanside, New York. Also, September 2019. A 16-year-old boy named Cassine Morris was brutally attacked by about half a dozen teenagers. Approximately 50 teenagers witnessed the fighting, many of them filming it with their phones, and none of them did anything to help. Cassine died from a stab wound to the chest. Kids just stood there and didn't help Cassine, said a police department detective. They videoed his death instead of helping him. These stories are by no means limited to the United States. For example, consider the 2 incidents in China's Guangdong province in June 2012. A toddler fell through an opening in a window ledge on the 4th floor of his apartment building and dangled by his neck on the metal grating of a ledge used to hold plants. One of the residents of the building heard the boy's screams, climbed through a window on the floor below, and inched his way up the outside of the building until he could help relieve the pressure on the child's neck and waited for rescue workers to arrive. The fate of another toddler from the same province several months before was far worse, however. An absolutely horrifying video from a surveillance camera captured the scene of a 2-year-old girl run over by a van on a narrow road, and then drove on, running her over again with a back tire. More than a dozen people walked or drove past the gravely injured girl for about 7 minutes. This is hard to read, y'all. Ah. A second vehicle, a truck, ran over her crushed body. Finally, a woman checked on her and pulled her away just before the girl's mother arrived. She died more than a week later. There is no simple answer to the question of why some people help and others don't. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get a grip. Or why some situations lead to quick assistance and others to shocking displays of inaction. The determinants of helping behavior are complex and multifaceted, but social psychologists have learned a great deal about these determinants and therefore about human nature. As you will see in the pages to come, some of their findings are quite surprising. In this chapter, we examine several questions about helping. Why do people help? When do they help? Who is likely to help? And whom do they help? The concluding section concentrates on a major recurring theme. That social connection underlies much of the theory and research on helping. So let's get started with evolutionary motivation and motivational factors. Although few individuals reach the heights of heroic helping, virtually everyone helps somebody sometime. People give their friends a ride to the airport, donate money, food, clothing for disaster relief, babysit for a relative, work as a volunteer for charitable activities, pick up the mail for a neighbor who's out of town. The list of pro-social behaviors, actions, intended to benefit others is endless. But why? Why do people help? We examine this question from a variety of perspectives, from principles of evolution to trying to change a rotten mood. So, evolutionary factors for helping. We begin with evolution. From an evolutionary perspective, what possible function can there be for helping others, especially at the risk of one's own life? Doesn't risking one's life for others fly in the face of evolutionary principles such as survival of the fittest? The selfish gene is the next section. In fact, as the title of the classic book, The Selfish Gene, by evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in 1976 suggests, evolutionary perspectives emphasize not the survival of the fittest individual, but the survival of the individual's genes. If a specific behavior enhances reproductive success, then the genetic underpinnings of that behavior are more likely to be passed on by subsequent generations. In this way, the behavior can eventually become part of the common inheritance of the species. The behavior of helping others could have served the function of preserving individual genes by promoting the survival of those who share their genetic makeup. I think I'm going to highlight that last sentence because it sums up the rest of the paragraph. By means of this indirect route to genetic survival, the tendency to help genetic relatives, called kin selection, it's a key term, highlight it. Also, I forgot to mention earlier, but pro-social behaviors, that's a key term as well. I would highlight that as well from the page before. Kin selection could become an innate characteristic of humans. In fact, kin selection is evident in the behavior of many organisms. For an example, just as humans often risk their lives to save close relatives, ground squirrels, capuchin monkeys, and many other mammals and birds emit an alarm to warn nearby relatives of a predator. The alarm helps their relatives, but it makes the individual who sounds the alarm more vulnerable to attack. Because I think I'm going to highlight that. Yeah. It's a good example of kin selection. Yeah, that last sentence. So because kin selection serves the function of genetic survival, preferential helping of genetic relatives should be strongest when the biological stakes are particularly high. This appears to be the case. For example, Gerald Carter and others in 2017 conducted experiments with bats and found that the bats shared food with both kin and non-kin under safe conditions. When the conditions seemed more dangerous, however, bats shared a much greater proportion of food with closer relatives. I think I'm going to mark that study. I don't know if it'll be important at this point. He makes such random study references on the quizzes and tests, but it may come in handy. Humans show this pattern. Participants in the study by Fitzgerald and Colliarelli, in 2009, were asked how willing they would be to offer different kinds of help to a friend, a half-sibling, or a sibling. There were 3 levels of helping behavior. The lowest risk involved picking up items from a store for the person. The medium risk involved loaning the person $10,000, and the highest risk involving trying to rescue the person from a burning house. As can be seen in figure 10.1, for the lowest risk helping scenario, participants rated themselves as likely to help a friend as a sibling. But for the higher stakes scenarios, however, they were significantly more willing to help a sibling than a friend. Their willingness to help a half-sibling fell in between their willingness to help a friend and their willingness to help a sibling. In a later study, Fitzgerald and others found that under low-risk scenarios, I'm making a note of that study as well, particularly because it has a figure. He tends to like those. They found that under low-risk scenarios in their later study in 2010, participants were more likely to help romantic partners than siblings. And they were as willing to help romantic partners with whom they had no biological children as they were to help those with whom they did. Under high-risk situations, however, participants became more likely to help siblings and romantic partners with whom they had biological children, but less willing to help romantic partners with whom they had no children or adopted children. In other words, under high-risk scenarios, genetic relatedness became more important in decisions about helping. I'm going to highlight that last sentence. Under high-risk scenarios. So the second section, the first one was about the selfish gene. This one's now about reciprocal altruism. Even though relatives may get preferential treatment, most people help out non-kin as well. What's the reproductive advantage of helping someone who isn't related to you? The most common answer is reciprocity. Though reciprocal altruism, key term highlight, it's altruism that involves an individual helping another despite some immediate risk or cost and becoming more likely to receive help from the other in return. Through reciprocal altruism, helping someone else can be in your best interest because it increases the likelihood that you will be helped in return. If A helps B and B helps A, both A and B may increase their chances of survival and reproductive success. Over the course of evolution, therefore, individuals who engage in reciprocal altruism should survive and reproduce more than individuals who do not, thus enabling this kind of altruism to flourish. I think I'm going to highlight that last sentence. It sums up everything pretty succinctly. Reciprocal altruism is evident across many species. A wide variety of animals groom each other. Large fish, such as groupers, allow small fish, such as wrasses, to swim in their mouths without eating them. The small fish get food for themselves, and at the same time, they remove parasites from the larger fish. Rats share food with other rats who have shared with them, which is interesting because rats are actually really big hoarders of food. It takes a lot for them to do that, even with family members. Wolves protect each other in fights against wolves from other packs. And Frans de Waal in 2019 observed thousands of interactions among chimpanzees and has seen how chimps who share with other chimps at one feeding are repaid by the other chimp at another feeding. Those who are selfish are rebuffed, sometimes violently, at a later feeding. In addition, de Waal has observed more complicated forms of reciprocation. If chimp A groomed chimp B, for example, chimp B became much more likely to then share his or her food with chimp A. So it's not specifically tit for tat. It's not I give food, I get food. It's I give food, I give social communal time, like with social grooming. Capuchins have done similar things. Okay, so it's interesting that these chimps and monkeys were able to negotiate this kind of reciprocity across acts, grooming and sharing. It's as if these primates operated under a norm that said, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or maybe I'll give you some of my apples. The more complicated reciprocation is not uncommon. For example, a meta-analysis of studies involving 14 different primate species, the researchers found evidence that grooming is reciprocated with support in fights against some other individual. So if you scratch my back, then I have your back in a fight. I think social grooming is more indicative of your social level of intimacy, but that's another thing. Anyway, wild dwarf mongooses it's not mongoose? Interesting. Okay, wild dwarf mongooses who help their group by acting as sentinels to warn predators receive more grooming in return from their group mates. A particularly charming type of reciprocation was reported by Barbara Tiddy and her colleagues in 2010. They observed that capuchin mothers allow other females to handle their babies. Oh, in exchange for being groomed by them. Oh, that's really cute. Okay, there's a lot of studies here. I think I'm just going to make a little mark, and you decide for yourself what you think you need to make a note of. Sorry, my dog. All right, so now we get to the evolution of empathy. Helping, of course, can go beyond assisting kin or members of one's own group. Consider the story of Binti Jua, for example. At the end of 1996, People magazine honored her as one of the 25 most intriguing people of the year, and Newsweek named her Hero of the Year. Earlier that year, while caring for her own 17-month-old daughter, Binti came across a 3-year-old boy who had fallen almost 20 feet onto a cement floor and been knocked unconscious. She picked up the boy and gently held him, rocking him softly, and then turned him over to paramedics. So what's most intriguing about Binti? The fact that she was a gorilla. When the boy climbed over a fence and fell into the primate exhibit at the Brooklyn Field Zoo near Chicago, witnesses feared the worst. One paramedic said, I didn't know if she was going to treat him like a doll or a toy. With her own daughter clinging to her back the entire time, Binti protected the toddler as if he were her own, keeping other gorillas at bay and eventually placing him gently at the entrance where the zookeepers and paramedics could get to him. I could not believe how gentle she was, observed a zoo director. Was this an act of kindness and compassion, or did the gorilla just do what she had been trained to do? Pick up and fetch things dropped into her cage. Cases like this raise the more fundamental question of whether concepts such as morality and empathy can apply to non-human animals. Most people think of these as qualities that allow humans to resist and rise above our more selfish, violent, and animalistic nature, but instead, they may reflect the social nature of many mammals, particularly primates. In order to live successfully in small groups, it was important for social animals to develop some sense of the proper way to behave in groups and the ability to recognize and respond to danger or suffering in other group members. Humans certainly have much more highly developed moral reasoning and capacity for empathy, but their moral roots can be traced down the evolutionary chain. Are you going to go get them? Still. Please. Thank you. Love you. Bye. Love you. Bye. Be careful, you're about to be on the screen. My husband, guys. Sorry. Where was I? Yes. In order to live successfully in small groups, it was important for social animals to develop some sense of a proper way to behave in groups and an ability to recognize and respond to danger or suffering in other group members. Humans certainly have much more highly developed moral reasoning and capacity for empathy, but their moral roots can be traced down the evolutionary chain. So I think I'm going to highlight the Binti example. I don't know if he's going to put that on the quiz or the test, but if you think he's not, then you don't have to make that note, but I'm going to. I think I'm going to highlight, in order to live successfully in small groups, it's important for social animals to develop some sense of the proper way to behave in groups and the ability to recognize and respond to danger or suffering in other group members. Okay, so we will see in several places throughout this chapter the critically important role that empathy plays in helping. It's a key term highlight. Unfortunately, the exact definition of empathy is much debated. For example, Dan Batson in 2009 identified no fewer than 8 distinct definitions of empathy that scholars use, and in the years since, there have been even less consensus. Most researchers regard empathy as having both a cognitive component of understanding the emotional experience of another individual and an emotional experience that is consistent with what the other is feeling. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that. That seems pretty critical. That most researchers define it as thus. Okay, so a major cognitive component of empathy is perspective taking. Highlight this. I have a feeling it's going to be super important. It's using the power of imagination to try to see the world through someone else's eyes. A key emotional component of empathy is empathetic concern. Again, highlight. Sounds critical. It involves other-oriented feelings. Other-oriented, hyphenated. Other-oriented feelings, such as sympathy, compassion, and tenderness. Yeah, that's going to be important. It's going to be on a test. Oh, the next page has a picture of Binti. Okay, so although higher order cognitive aspects of empathy are specific to humans, other animals show evidence of empathy in a variety of ways. Frans de Waal has cited numerous and startling examples of primates such as chimpanzees and bonobos seeming to show empathy. It depicts figure 10.2 depicts a juvenile chimpanzee putting an arm around an adult male who had just been defeated in a fight. Aww. This kind of consoling behavior is not uncommon in chimpanzees, and it has been shown to reduce the recipient's arousal. De Waal also reports examples of chimpanzees who risk their lives trying to save companions from drowning, even though they themselves were unable to swim. That's crazy. I mean, sweet. Okay, I like this chapter. It's got all my feels going. Less dramatically, young chimps have been seen helping to push an old and arthritic group member up onto a climbing frame for a grooming session. The examples De Waal has collected suggest at least some degree of perspective taking and sympathy among non-human primates. Additional research suggests that dogs and even rodents, such as rats and mice, show evidence of being sensitive to the pain of other individuals of their species and trying to help them when in distress. I'm going to highlight that. Sympathy among... I think I'm going to highlight De Waal has collected all the way to the end of that paragraph. Because it's just a little bit of the sentence before and the last sentence. All right, so very young human infants show signs of being affected by the distress of others, and by their first birthday, begin to comfort victims of distress. In one particularly interesting study, Felix Warneken and Michael Tomasello in 2006 placed 18-month-old infants with an adult experimenter. At various points in time, the experimenter appeared to be having trouble reaching a goal. For example, he accidentally dropped a marker on the floor and tried unsuccessfully to reach it. Or he couldn't put some magazines into a cabinet because the door was closed. 22 of the 24 infants tested in the study helped the experimenter in at least one of the tasks, and many infants helped on several. In doing so, the infants apparently understood that the experimenter needed help, that is, that he was having trouble completing a task by himself. I think I'm going to highlight that 22 of the 24 helped and apparently understood they needed help in this study. Yeah. 2 additional details are worth noting about the study. First, the experimenter never requested help, nor did he praise or reward them when they did help. Second, for every task he needed help with, the experimenter created a similar situation in which he did not seem to have a problem. For example, rather than accidentally dropping the marker on the floor and try to reach it, the experimenter sometimes intentionally threw the marker on the floor and tried to reach it. Sometimes, in these situations, the infants were not likely to take action such as picking up the marker. So this suggests that when they did help the experimenter, they did so because they understood he was trying to achieve a goal. The researchers also tested 3 young chimpanzees using a similar procedure. The chimpanzees also helped the experimenter when they saw that he appeared to need help reaching a goal, although not across as many tasks or as reliably as the human infants did. So, I think I'm going to make a note of that, but just as a study thing. Neuroscience research supports the idea that the capacity for empathy is part of our biology. I'm going to highlight that. Seeing someone else experience positive or negative emotion can trigger activation of brain structures associated with the actual experience of that emotion. This activation in turn predicts individuals' tendencies to actually engage in everyday helping behavior. In addition, the hormone oxytocin, which is well known as being involved in mother-infant attachment as well as bonding between mating pairs, is implicated in empathy and prosocial behaviors. I'm going to highlight that. The hormone oxytocin, all the way to the end of that sentence. And helping can in turn increase oxytocin. For example, Liren Samuni and others in 2018 found that when chimpanzees shared food with each other, their oxytocin levels rose. An important characteristic of mammals related to empathy is how much care their offspring require to survive. Caregivers must understand the emotional communications from their young and respond to their emotional needs. The gorilla Binti very well may have been acting on maternal caregiving impulses as she gently held the little boy who had fallen into her area. 5 elephants may also have been acting on parental care instincts in Thailand in October 2019 when they saw or heard a baby elephant fall into a waterfall. They risked and ultimately lost their own lives trying to rescue it. 2 more elephants were saved as they were trying to go in after the others. Oh, that breaks my heart. Some scholars believe that the importance of caring for offspring may have played a critical role in the evolution of empathy. A key feature in human evolution was when our hominin ancestors began to raise their offspring cooperatively, with fathers, siblings, aunts, and others occasionally helping to support the helpless infant rather than just the mother. This set the foundation for what Burkhardt calls the hyper-cooperation, which is characteristic of humans. I'm going to highlight that. Our hominin ancestors set the foundation for what Burkhardt calls hyper-cooperative. Yeah. So, rewards of helping. Helping others to help oneself. The discussion thus far. Sorry, I'm just checking where we are. Only 4 more pages. Cool. The rewards of helping. The discussion thus far has focused on how helping may have evolved. We turn now to focus on helping in a contemporary context. Helping others can, of course, be costly, but it can also be rewarding psychologically, physically, and materially. We all like the idea of being the hero, lifted onto the shoulders of our peers for coming to the rescue of someone in distress. In this section, we discuss some of the rewards and costs of helping. So, feeling good. Imagine someone hands you 20 bucks and gives you one rule. You have to spend it on yourself by the end of the day. Sweet, right? Okay, imagine instead that your instruction is that you have to spend it on someone else. Nice, but not quite as sweet a deal for you, right? When Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues in 2008 asked people which would make them happier, most people said they'd be happier spending the money on themselves. But in a clever set of studies, the researchers actually gave people money with one of those 2 sets of instructions, and they found that people who spent the money on others were significantly happier than those who purchased something for themselves. This held true across a wide variety of age groups and cultures, even in places in which resources were very limited. Yeah, they say see figure 10.3, the joy of giving. I think I'm going to make a note of that. So the simple but important point is this: helping others often feels good. I'm going to highlight that. Very succinct. A growing body of research, including a meta-analysis of 27 studies, reveals a reliable relationship between giving help and feeling better. These studies have shown that helping others is associated with improvements in the helper's mental and physical health. For example, participants, I'm going to highlight that. Helping others is associated with improvements to mental and physical health. Okay, so for example, participants diagnosed with high blood pressure were randomly assigned in one study to spend money for 3 consecutive weeks on others or on themselves. The participants who spent money on others had significantly reduced blood pressure at the end of 3 weeks compared to those who spent money on themselves. Social neuroscience research provides additional evidence for the rewarding feeling of helping. Numerous studies have shown that engaging in altruistic behavior, even when it costs the self, activates an area of the brain associated with receiving actual material rewards. I'm going to highlight that. Engaging in altruistic behavior, even when it costs the self, activates. Yeah, that whole sentence. Sorry, I forgot to make a note of the blood pressure study. So in a recent meta-analysis of brain imaging studies, they suggest that cooperation with others is associated not only with the reward of feeling better, but also with avoiding the negative feelings triggered by unfairness. In their negative state relief model, Robert Cialdini and his colleagues in 1987 proposed that because of this positive effect of helping, people who are feeling bad are inclined to help others in order to improve their mood. People who have experienced distressing or even traumatic events, for example, show mental and physical health benefits from helping others. So I would highlight the negative state relief model. That's a key term. The relationship between helping and feeling good might be a psychological universal. Looking at 137 countries across the world, Lara Aknin and her colleagues in 2013 found a positive correlation between donating money and happiness in the majority of countries. I think I'm just going to make a note of that. They found that charitable giving had twice the association with happiness as income did. Okay, I'm highlighting that. That's pretty big. That's insane. Furthermore, when they asked participants in Canada, Uganda, and India to think about a time they spent money on someone else, they were subsequently happier than those who were asked to think about a time when they spent money on themselves. Even when the costs of helping people are high enough that it doesn't feel good immediately, it can pay off on the long run. When parents reluctantly sacrifice relaxing with a good book or movie at the end of a hard day in order to help their kids finish some homework, they might not feel immediate joy from giving help. But in the long run, they can expect to reap the benefits of their behavior. I'm going to highlight that last sentence. Might not feel immediate joy, but in the long run, expect to reap their benefits. All right, so the cost of helping or of not helping. I think this is the last section that we'll do today. We're breezing through this, guys. The cost of helping or not helping. Clearly, helping has its rewards, but it also has its costs as well. The firefighters in Ladder Company 6, who somehow survived the collapse of the North Tower of the World Trade Center while saving Josephine Harris, were among the lucky ones. Many people were killed while helping others that day, such as Abraham Zelmanowitz, a computer programmer who refused to leave his quadriplegic friend who could not descend the stairs. And beyond 9/11, we often are moved by stories of the costs paid by those who offer help, such as Donald Liu, who in August 2012 saw 2 boys swept up by riptides in Lake Michigan and swam in to save them, despite the protests from his own children about the dangerous conditions. The boys were saved. but the 50-year-old chief of pediatric surgery at the University of Chicago and father of 3 young children. He did not survive. Wow. Other helpers have done more sustained and deliberate helping, such as people who helped hide runaway slaves in the 19th century, or people who helped hide Jews during the Holocaust. Sharon Shapela and others in 1999 called this type of thoughtful helping in the face of potentially enormous costs courageous resistance. We're going to highlight that and its definition. Thoughtful helping in the face of potentially enormous costs. And although giving help is often associated with positive effect in health, when the help involves constant and exhausting demands, which is often the case when taking long-term care of a very ill person, the effects on helpers' physical and mental health, as well as their financial security, can be quite negative. I'm going to highlight that. That whole sentence, honestly. I know it's long, but it's got meat. So although people sometimes help despite tremendous risk, most people often seem to conduct a cost-benefit analysis before deciding whether or not to help strangers. To lower some of the costs of helping, some legislators have created Good Samaritan laws to encourage bystanders to intervene in emergencies by offering them legal protection, such as for doctors who volunteer medical care when they happen on emergencies, or for people who otherwise would worry about criminal prosecution if they call the police to report a drug overdose. Other kinds of Good Samaritan laws increase the cost of failing to help, sometimes called duty to rescue laws. These laws require people to provide or summon aid in an emergency as long as they do not endanger themselves in the process. In the United States, this kind of duty to rescue law is relatively rare, but they are more common in Europe and Canada. Okay, so I'm going to highlight Good Samaritan laws, duty to rescue laws, and I think I'm going to highlight most people often seem to conduct a cost-benefit analysis before deciding whether or not to help strangers. Okay, so altruism or egoism, the great debate. Ooh. Should I try to power through since we are only 47 minutes in? No, I'm going to take it easy. Altruism versus egoism will be next. Bye, guys. See you later.